November 18, 1962, Vienna, Austria. Quentin Foster loosened his tie as he entered his apartment, the weight of the Cuban Missile Crisis still bearing down on him despite its official resolution 3 weeks prior. As a cultural attaché at the U.S. Embassy, a paper-thin cover for his actual role with the CIA, he'd spent the last month in a state of heightened vigilance that had left him perpetually exhausted. The apartment was dark and quiet. He flicked on the lamp, revealing the modest furnishings of his temporary home. A worn leather sofa, a coffee table stacked with books in German and Russian, and the desk where he wrote his reports. On the walls hung innocuous landscape paintings, one concealing a wall safe containing his coded communications equipment. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, his nightly ritual to decompress from the day's tensions. Through the window, the lights of Vienna glimmered, a deceptively peaceful tableau. The city remained a chessboard where American and Soviet intelligence played their perpetual game, and Quentin was a knight, moving obliquely, always watchful. At 42, Quentin had served his country for nearly 2 decades, first in Army intelligence during the Korean War, then recruited to the agency in 54. Vienna was his 3rd European posting after stints in West Berlin and Frankfurt. His superiors valued his methodical approach and fluency in Russian, but lately, he'd begun questioning whether the sacrifices were worth it. The failed marriage back home, the son who barely knew him, the constant vigilance that had become second nature. The telephone rang, slicing through his thoughts. He checked his watch, 10:37 p.m., too late for a routine call. He let it ring twice more, a precaution against potential surveillance, before answering. Foster speaking. Quinn, it's Weatherby. The voice of his station chief carried an unusual urgency. Can you come in? Something's developed. Now? Immediately. Use the secondary entrance. The line went dead. Quentin downed his bourbon, grabbed his coat, and checked his Walther PPK before holstering it beneath his jacket. Secondary entrance meant trouble. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall. He walked 6 blocks before doubling back, employing basic counter-surveillance techniques that had become second nature. No tail tonight, but he remained vigilant. Vienna was crawling with KGB. He entered the embassy complex through a service entrance on Boltzmann, using his key to access a maintenance corridor that led to the secure wing. The guard, Thompson, nodded as he approached. They're waiting for you in conference room B, sir. Quentin found not only Weatherby but also Warren Miles from counterintelligence and a man he didn't recognize. Tall, gaunt, with the unmistakable bearing of a senior official from Langley. Foster, this is Deputy Director Carson, Weatherby said. The tall man didn't smile as they shook hands. I've read your reports on Soviet penetration of the Austrian energy sector. Good work. Thank you, sir. We have a situation, Weatherby continued, gesturing to the files spread across the table. 6 hours ago, our listening post intercepted an unusual communication from the Soviet embassy. Encrypted, high priority, directed to Moscow Center. We were able to decode portions using the new algorithm. He handed Quentin a transcript. The message was fragmented but alarming. References to Jupiter and immediate response protocols stood out among the code phrases. Jupiter is their designation for our missile installations in Turkey, Miles explained. The ones we just agreed to dismantle as part of the Cuban resolution. What's troubling, Carson interjected, is this indicates they believe we're preparing those missiles for immediate launch. It's completely false, but Moscow appears to be taking it seriously. Quentin studied the transcript. This looks like panic. Who's sending this? That's why you're here, Weatherby said. The message originated from a telephonic communication made by an individual we believe is Volkov. Quentin's pulse quickened. Volkov was the code name for a Soviet illegal they'd been tracking for months. A deep cover agent believed to be operating as a professor at the University of Vienna. Despite extensive surveillance, they'd never positively identified the individual. "We believe Volkov has been activated for an emergency protocol," Carson said. "The Soviets think we're preparing a first strike, and they're mobilizing their response options. If we don't defuse this quickly, we could be looking at nuclear escalation, based entirely on false information." Quentin processed the implications. "You need me to find Volkov. Not just find," Weatherby corrected. "Extract. Tonight, before they disappear or make another report. You've been closest to this case and you speak the language. We need to understand what they think they know and shut down this line of disinformation before the Kremlin does something unthinkable." Carson slid a folder across the table. "This is everything we have. Identity still uncertain, but we've narrowed it to 3 possibilities. Your clearance has been temporarily elevated to cosmic top secret for this operation." Quentin opened the folder. 3 photographs stared back at him. 2 men and a woman, all in their 40s or 50s, all academics at the university. The woman is Dr. Wilma Janssen, linguistics professor, Belgian national, but spent 3 years in East Germany before coming to Vienna in '58, Weatherby explained. The older man is Dr. Klaus Reinhardt, theoretical physicist, Swiss credentials but biographical gaps during the war years. The younger one is Dr. Thomas Klein, political science, Canadian passport but suspected falsified background. Any surveillance on them now? We lost Reinhardt and Klein after their evening lectures, Miles admitted. Janssen was followed to her apartment on Mariahilfer Strasse. We have a team watching the building. What's the extraction plan? Quentin asked. Diplomatic vehicle, safe house in the American sector, then immediate air transport to Frankfurt for interrogation, Carson replied. We need this done quietly. The Austrians can't know. Neutrality agreements. Quentin nodded, already forming a mental map of the operation. I'll need a second. Someone I trust. Take Wilson, Weatherby suggested. He's been working the university coverage. And authorization parameters? Quentin asked, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Carson understood. This is a national security emergency. Do what's necessary to secure the target. If they resist. He didn't finish the sentence. Within 30 minutes, Quentin and Wilson were in a nondescript Opel, driving through the lightly snow-covered streets toward Mariahilfer Strasse. In the passenger seat, Wilson, younger, eager but solid, checked his sidearm. You really think this professor could trigger World War III? Wilson asked. Someone feeding Moscow bad intelligence already has, Quentin replied. We're just trying to cut the wire before the bomb detonates. They parked a block from Janssen's building. 2 CIA officers were already in position. Roberts in a parked car across the street and Daniels pretending to smoke near the entrance. No movement, Roberts reported over the radio. Lights still on in her apartment, 4th floor. Quentin considered the options. A forced extraction from the building carried significant risks. Witnesses, potential resistance, the attention of Austrian authorities. Let's get her to come to us, he decided. Call her apartment. Say there's been a water leak in the building. All residents need to evacuate temporarily. Wilson made the call from a nearby telephone booth, speaking German with a Viennese accent. 10 minutes later, residents began emerging from the building. Quentin and Wilson watched each one carefully. There, Wilson whispered, nodding toward a woman in her late 40s, hair pulled back, wearing a long wool coat and carrying a leather satchel. Dr. Wilma Janssen looked nothing like a spy. She moved with the slight distraction of an academic, glancing around at the other evacuated residents with mild annoyance. Could be nothing in that bag. Could be a transmitter, Wilson murmured. Or a weapon. Follow my lead, Quentin instructed, then approached her directly. Dr. Janssen? U.S. Embassy Security. There's been a threat against foreign faculty members. We need to get you to safety immediately. Her eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication of suspicion. May I see some identification, please? Quentin produced his diplomatic credentials. She studied them carefully, then looked up, her expression unreadable. Is this about the student protests? I've received no threats. It's a developing situation. Please, our car is just here. He gestured toward the Opel where Roberts now sat behind the wheel. For a moment, Jansen hesitated. Quentin maintained eye contact, keeping his posture non-threatening while positioning himself to block any attempt to flee. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the weighing of options. Very well, she finally said, her accent flawlessly Belgian. As they walked toward the car, Wilson fell in behind her. The moment she was seated in the back, Quentin slid in beside her, and Wilson took the passenger seat. This isn't the way to the embassy, she observed as Roberts drove in the opposite direction. Security protocol, Quentin replied. Then, dropping all pretense, we need to discuss your recent telephone call, Volkov. The change was subtle but unmistakable. A slight stiffening of her posture, a momentary freeze before she composed herself. I don't know what you're talking about. My name is Wilma Jansen. I demand you take me to the Austrian authorities immediately. Quentin removed her satchel despite her protests and opened it. Inside were papers, books, a wallet, and a small, specialized receiving device, the kind used to monitor encrypted shortwave transmissions. Standard equipment for linguistics professors? He asked. Her eyes hardened. I use it for research, radiolinguistics across different regions. We can continue this discussion at a more secure location, Quentin said as the car turned onto a quiet street leading away from the city center. Suddenly, headlights appeared behind them, closing rapidly. Wilson turned to look. We have company, he warned. The pursuing vehicle accelerated, ramming them from behind. Roberts fought to maintain control as their car fishtailed on the snow-slicked road. KGB, Quentin realized. They must have had their own surveillance on Jansen. The car behind them rammed them again, harder. Roberts swerved, nearly hitting a parked vehicle. Two men were visible in the pursuing car. Lose them, Quentin ordered, drawing his weapon. Roberts made a sharp turn down a narrow side street, accelerating hard. The pursuing car followed. Wilson rolled down his window, prepared to return fire if necessary. This won't end well for you, Jansen said calmly. There are protocols in place. Messages already sent. About the Jupiter missiles? Quentin challenged. Whatever you reported is wrong. There's no activation, no preparation for launch. Something flickered across her face. Uncertainty. My information is reliable. Your information is going to start World War III, Quentin countered. Moscow is already preparing response options based on your report. The pursuing car was gaining on them. Roberts took another turn, then another, trying to shake them through Vienna's maze-like streets. If what you say is true, Jansen said slowly, then why not simply communicate through diplomatic channels? Tell the Soviets directly. Because we need to know your source, Quentin pressed. Who told you about Jupiter? What exactly did you report? The pursuing car pulled alongside them. Wilson raised his weapon, but before he could fire, gunshots shattered their rear window. Roberts slumped forward, blood spreading across his shirt. The car swerved wildly. Quentin lunged across the seat, grabbing the wheel as Roberts' foot slipped from the accelerator. Wilson fired back at their pursuers as Quentin struggled to control the vehicle. Wilson, take the wheel. Wilson awkwardly maneuvered himself into the driver's seat, pushing Roberts aside as Quentin kept pressure on the wheel. The car scraped against a building, sending sparks flying before Wilson gained control. In the chaos, Jansen remained strangely calm. "You're making a mistake," she said. "I'm not who you think I am." "Then who are you?" Quentin demanded, checking Robert's pulse. The man was still alive but unconscious and bleeding badly. "Someone trying to prevent what you're afraid of," she replied enigmatically. Wilson managed to put some distance between them and their pursuers, turning down progressively narrower streets until they reached a secluded courtyard behind an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district. "We need to move," Wilson said, killing the engine. "They'll have called in our location and description." Quentin quickly bandaged Robert's wound with supplies from the car's emergency kit. "Help me get him out. We'll have to leave him at the safe house and call for medical extraction." As they transferred Roberts to a sheltered doorway, Quentin kept his weapon trained on Jansen. "Don't try anything. Your KGB friends just shot an American diplomat. The situation is escalating exactly as we feared." "They're not KGB," she replied. "They're GRU military intelligence. And they don't know what I know." This new information gave Quentin pause. If she was differentiating between KGB and GRU, she was either telling the truth or maintaining an elaborate cover. "Which is what, exactly?" She studied him carefully. "I need assurances. You're not in a position to negotiate. If what you say is true, if Moscow truly believes a first strike is imminent, then I'm exactly in a position to negotiate. Because I'm the only one who can stop it." A distant siren wailed. They were running out of time. "The safe house is 3 blocks from here," Wilson said. "We need to move now." "If I go with you," Jansen said, "I want direct communication with your superiors in Washington, not the local station." "Washington." Quentin made a split-second decision. "Agreed. Now move." They proceeded on foot through back alleys, Quentin keeping Jansen close while Wilson scouted ahead. The safe house was an inconspicuous apartment above a bookstore, accessible through a service entrance. Once inside, Wilson secured the perimeter while Quentin radioed for medical assistance for Roberts, who they'd hidden in a storage room near the warehouse with a note for the extraction team. "Now," Quentin said, turning to Jansen. "Talk." She removed her coat and sat at the small table in the kitchen area. "My name is not Wilma Jansen. That identity was created 5 years ago when I was placed in Vienna. My real name is Wera Jurova, Colonel, Department 16, KGB. Department 16 handles nuclear intelligence." Quentin noted, his suspicion deepening. "Yes. 3 days ago, I received information from a source within your military that the Jupiter missiles in Turkey were being prepared for launch readiness, despite the agreement to dismantle them following the Cuban crisis." "That's categorically false." "Perhaps." Her expression remained neutral. "But my source has been reliable for 7 years. He provided technical details, maintenance schedules, crew rotations, arming procedures. Very specific." "Who is this source?" She smiled slightly. "You know I can't tell you that." Quentin considered the implications. "So you made your report to Moscow based on this intelligence?" "I had to, but I included my own assessment that the information required verification. Unfortunately, certain elements in Moscow, particularly within the military, seized on the report. They've been looking for evidence that the Cuban resolution was a deception. And now Moscow has ordered increased readiness for their own nuclear forces. The military is pushing for preemptive measures." Quentin felt cold dread settling in his stomach. This was exactly the scenario they feared. Miscalculation leading to escalation, escalation leading to annihilation. If you knew this could happen, why make the report at all? Because if I didn't report it and the information proved accurate, millions would die in a surprise attack. I made a calculation. Her expression softened slightly. The same calculation you would make in my position. Wilson returned from checking the building's perimeter. "Streets are quiet for now, but we should assume they're searching systematically. Quentin nodded, then turned back to Jansen or Jourova. You said you can stop this. How? I need to contact my handler. Explain that I've verified the information was false. But it needs to happen quickly, before the military convinces the Politburo to act. And we're supposed to just let you walk out and make that call? No. I'll make it from here with you present. You'll hear everything I say. Quentin exchanged looks with Wilson. Could be a trap, but they were running out of options. How do we know you'll tell them the truth? Wilson asked. Because contrary to what you might believe, I have no interest in nuclear war, she replied evenly. I've spent my career preventing it. The safe house telephone rang, startling them all. Quentin answered cautiously. Foster secure. This is Carson. We've received new intelligence. Soviet strategic forces are moving to heightened alert status. Long-range bombers are being prepared for possible deployment. We need to resolve this situation immediately. Sir, I have Volkov. Her real name is Vera Jourova, KGB Department 16. She claims her source provided false information about Jupiter, but she can correct the record if we allow her to contact her handler. A pause. That's an extraordinary risk, Foster. I understand, sir, but we're looking at potential nuclear mobilization based on faulty intelligence. Time is critical. Another pause, longer this time. Do it, but maintain absolute control of the situation. If anything seems off, terminate the communication immediately. Understood. Quentin hung up and turned to Jourova. You'll use our secure line. I'll be listening to every word. Any deviation from what we've discussed, any code phrases or hidden messages, and I'll cut the line. Are we clear? She nodded. Perfectly clear. Quentin set up the secure telephone while Wilson kept watch at the window. Jourova provided a Moscow number and a series of authentication codes that would route the call to her handler. As the connection was established, Quentin listened on a separate headset. Jourova spoke in Russian, identifying herself with a numerical sequence before proceeding. This is an emergency clarification regarding Jupiter Report Delta 79. I have personally verified the information was incorrect. Repeat, the Jupiter information was incorrect. No preparations for launch are underway. Source appears to have been compromised or deliberately spreading disinformation. The voice on the other end responded tersely, demanding explanations. I cannot provide details on this channel, she continued, but I stake my life and record on this assessment. The report must be downgraded immediately and strategic force escalation halted. More questions from Moscow, more measured responses from Jourova. She navigated the conversation expertly, emphasizing the certainty of her revised assessment without revealing her current situation. Finally, she concluded, I will submit a complete written assessment through usual channels within 48 hours. Until then, all response protocols based on the Jupiter report should be suspended. Acknowledge. The acknowledgement came reluctant but clear. After hanging up, Jourova exhaled slowly. They'll inform the military. Whether the military listens is another question. We need verification, Quentin insisted. How do we know they'll actually stand down? You have your listening posts, your satellites. Watch and see. She leaned back in her chair. Now, what happens to me? The question hung in the air as the telephone rang again. Carson, with an update. Satellite intelligence showed Soviet bombers returning to standard posture. The immediate crisis appeared to be easing. Bring her in, Carson ordered. Full debriefing protocol. As dawn approached, Quentin and Wilson escorted Jourova to the embassy, where a team was waiting to transport her to a secure facility in Germany. Before she was led away, Quentin had one final question. Why did you cooperate? You could have let this play out. She studied him, her expression thoughtful. We are adversaries, Mr. Foster, not enemies. There's a difference. And your source? The one who provided the false information. Perhaps not false from his perspective. Perception is everything in our line of work. She smiled faintly. You should look closer to home, somewhere in your Turkish operation. Someone who truly believes we are on the brink of war may be trying to force the issue. With that cryptic suggestion, she was escorted away, leaving Quentin with the unsettling realization that they'd narrowly averted disaster, and that the real threat might still remain undetected within their own ranks. 3 months later, Quentin stood on the Glienicke Bridge between West Berlin and Potsdam, watching as Vera Jourova was exchanged for 2 American agents captured in East Germany. As she passed him on the bridge, their eyes met briefly. No words were exchanged, but an understanding passed between them. Reluctant respect between professionals who had glimpsed the abyss and stepped back. The investigation into the Jupiter missile disinformation eventually led to a junior communications officer at the NATO base in Turkey, a man whose brother had been killed in Hungary in '56 and who believed a confrontation with the Soviets was inevitable and necessary. His deliberately altered maintenance reports, transmitted through multiple channels, had nearly triggered the war he thought unavoidable. Quentin never saw Vera Jourova again, though occasionally he would spot her coded signature in intercepted KGB communications. She continued her work in Department 16 until the mid-1970s, when her name disappeared from intelligence reports altogether. Years later, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Quentin, by then retired and teaching at Georgetown, received an unmarked envelope containing only a newspaper clipping about the dismantling of the last Soviet nuclear missiles aimed at the United States and a handwritten note. Adversaries, not enemies. W.J. It was the closest thing to vindication he would ever receive for the night they'd stepped back from the edge together. A Soviet spy and an American intelligence officer united by the understanding that some lines should never be crossed, even in the shadow game they had both devoted their lives to playing.